A millionaire heiress was on the verge of divorce when she received devastating news. She had only a few months to live. Her husband, already considering abandoning her, couldn't bring himself to leave at the most difficult time. But as they battled time and illness, family conspiracies threatened to destroy everything they had built. Secrets from the past surfaced, lost memories were recovered, and a childhood connection proved to be the thread that had always united them. A story of love, betrayal, and second chances that will stir your emotions from beginning to end. Get ready because this story will touch your heart. Before the story begins, subscribe to the channel, like it, and tell me what you thought of the story in the comments. The echo of Helena Montrose's heels echoed through the marble corridors of the 30th floor of Montrose Tower, each step a silent declaration of authority. At 32, she carried on her delicate shoulders the weight of an empire built by 3 generations of her family. As CEO of Montrose Stores, the largest department store conglomerate in the country, Helena had learned early on that fragility was a luxury she could not afford. Her secretary, Marina, followed a few steps behind, tablet in hand, reciting the day's agenda with metronome-like precision. The meeting with the Japanese investors at 9, lunch with the board at noon, and at 3 you have the presentation of the new expansion projects. Helena stopped abruptly in front of the mahogany double doors that led to her office, almost causing Marina to collide with her. "Cancel everything after 2, she said, her voice carrying a tension she could no longer disguise. "But ma'am, the presentation." "I said cancel." Helena's blue eyes shone with a hardness that made people recoil, but behind that facade, a whirlwind of emotions threatened to spill over. Inside the glass and steel sanctuary that was her office, Helena finally allowed her mask to slip for a moment. Her hands trembled as she held the white envelope that had arrived that morning. "Dr. Ricardo Santos, neurologist." The words danced before her eyes. "We urgently request your presence to discuss the test results." 3 years into her marriage to Daniel Carvalho, the brilliant lawyer who had risen from nowhere to become the firm's legal director, she had never felt so alone. The relationship that had begun as a strategic partnership, he needed financial stability. She needed someone competent by her side, had transformed into something deeper, but also more complicated. Daniel was unlike any man she had ever known. The son of a seamstress and a mechanic, he had earned his place in the world through sheer determination and a sharp intellect. When they met at a corporate law conference, Helena had been fascinated by his argumentative style, by the passion in his brown eyes when he spoke about justice. But 3 years later, that same passion seemed to have faded amid arguments over work, unmet expectations, and unspoken words. The night before, they had argued again. Daniel had come home late from the office, finding Helena still hunched over financial reports at the dining room table. "You didn't even look up when I arrived," he had said, frustration evident in his voice. "And you didn't even greet me," she retorted without taking her eyes off the numbers dancing before her. "Helena, when was the last time we talked about something other than work? When was the last time you looked at me? Really looked at me?" She had looked up then, seeing in her husband's weary face a sadness that made her choke. I have responsibilities, Daniel. You know that. And so do I. But it seems that somewhere along the way we lost our way." Now, sitting in her Italian leather chair, Helena felt the weight of those words. There was truth in them that she didn't want to admit. Somewhere between mergers, acquisitions, and family pressures, they had stopped seeing each other as people and started treating each other like pieces on a chessboard. The phone rang, interrupting her musings. It was Marina. "Ma'am, Dr. Santos is on the line. He said it's urgent." Helena felt her stomach tighten. "Pass it to me." The doctor's voice was gentle but professional. "Helena, I need you to come to the hospital immediately. We have your test results and we need to talk in person. Can't you tell me over the phone?" A long pause. "I'd rather we talk here. Can you bring any family members?" Helena's heart skipped a beat. Her lifelong formal education told her to maintain her composure, but a primal part of her screamed in panic. "I'll be there in an hour." As she hung up the phone, a single tear ran down her perfectly made-up face. For the first time in years, Helena Montrose allowed herself to feel fear. And for the first time in months, her first thought was of Daniel. She needed him, not her general counsel, not her strategic husband, but the man who had once promised to be by her side in sickness and in health. With trembling hands, she dialed his number. Daniel was reviewing contracts in his office when the phone rang. Seeing Helena's name on the screen surprised him. She rarely called during business hours, preferring to send concise messages through her answering machine. Daniel? Her voice sounded different, vulnerable in a way he hadn't heard in a long time. Hey, how's it going? I need to go to the hospital. Dr. Santos wants to see me about the tests I had last week. A pause. Could you go with me? Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Helena's call for help was like seeing an iceberg reveal its underwater base. Of course. Where are you? At the office. But Daniel, he told me to bring someone from the family. I think... Her voice trailed off. I think it might be something serious. I'm coming down now. 20 minutes later, they were in Helena's Mercedes. The silence in the car thick with unspoken tension. Daniel watched his wife's profile as she drove, noticing the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He wanted to say something, but the right word seemed stuck somewhere between his heart and his throat. Doctor. Santos's office was an oasis of calm in the chaos of the hospital, with its neutral-toned walls and carefully placed plants. The doctor, a middle-aged man with gray hair and kind eyes, greeted them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Helena, thank you for coming so quickly. Daniel, right? He extended his hand to shake. Please have a seat. Helena settled into her chair with the erect posture she maintained in board meetings. But Daniel could see her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Almost without thinking, he reached out and covered her hand. To his surprise, she didn't pull away. Helena, Dr. Santos began, your test results revealed something we need to discuss carefully. You have a brain tumor. It's rare, located in a delicate region, and... He paused. We need to act quickly. The world seemed to stop. Daniel felt Helena's hands tremble beneath his, but she kept her expression impassive. It was typical of her to weather the storm with the same expression she used to close million-dollar deals. How long? She asked, her voice eerily calm. With aggressive treatment, we can talk about a few months. Without treatment. The doctor didn't need to finish the sentence. A few months. Helena repeated the words as if testing their flavor. And the treatment options? As Dr. Santos explained chemotherapy and radiation protocols, Daniel felt as if he were seeing everything through a veil. The woman he had known, admired, loved, and recently considered leaving sat there listening to her own death sentence with the same composure with which she analyzed quarterly reports. Helena. Daniel finally found his voice as they left the office an hour later. No. She turned to him in the empty hallway. Don't tell me you're sorry. Don't tell me it's going to be okay. Just take me home. The drive back was even quieter than the way there, but it was a different kind of silence, fraught not only with tension, but with a deep, shared sadness. When they arrived at the Montrose mansion in the city's most upscale neighborhood, Helena turned to him. You don't have to stay, you know. I'd understand if you wanted to. If you wanted to move on with your life. Daniel looked at her. Really looked. He saw the strong woman who had conquered the business world, but he also saw the scared girl hiding behind the corporate armor. He saw the wife he had loved and somehow still loved, despite all the fighting and resentment. Helena, he said softly, 3 years ago I promised to stay by your side in sickness and in health. I didn't know I'd be tested so soon, but he touched her face gently. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in years, Helena broke down. The tears she had held back throughout the meeting finally fell, and she allowed herself to be vulnerable in the arms of the man she had forgotten how to love. Daniel held her as she cried, feeling his own tears wet her hair. At that moment in the foyer of the house that had always felt more like a museum than a home, something began to shift between them. The devastating diagnosis had broken down the barriers they had built for themselves, revealing a love that had never truly disappeared, only hidden beneath layers of pride and unmet expectations. In the weeks following the diagnosis, the dynamic between Helena and Daniel began to shift in subtle but profound ways. The news was kept confidential, known only to the two of them and the medical circle involved in the treatment. Helena insisted that the family and company employees should not know yet. She needed time to process and plan how to deal with the implications. Daniel began coming home early, canceling commitments he'd previously considered non-negotiable. The first night after his diagnosis, he found Helena in the library, not reading reports as usual, but leafing through an album of old photos. "Remember this?" she said, pointing to a photo of them on their wedding day. They both looked younger, more hopeful. "You were so nervous you forgot half the vows. And you recited them perfectly, of course." Daniel sat beside her on the velvet sofa. "You were always perfect at everything." Helena laughed, a sound he hadn't heard in months. "Perfect? Daniel, I'm a disaster. Always have been. I've just gotten really good at hiding it." It was a surprising admission coming from her. Helena had always projected an image of total control, as if every aspect of her life were carefully orchestrated. Seeing her admit vulnerability was like witnessing an eclipse, rare and transformative. "Do you want to talk about what happened to us?" Daniel asked gently. Helena closed the album and leaned back on the couch. "I think we stopped seeing each other as people and started seeing each other as functions. You were the husband, the legal director, the man who came from the bottom and earned his place. I was the heiress, the CEO, the woman who needed to prove she deserved the family empire. And somewhere in the middle of it, we forgot we were Helena and Daniel." "Exactly." She looked at him in a way he hadn't seen in a long time, without the barriers she usually kept up. "Daniel, I never told you, but when my grandfather died and I took over as president, I was terrified. Everyone expected me to fail. Some even hoped so." Daniel remembered those first few months. Helena worked 16-hour days, coming home exhausted and often with headaches. He had tried to help, to offer support, but she always insisted she could handle it alone. "Why didn't you tell me this at the time?" "Because I thought if you knew how scared I was, you might..." She hesitated. "Could what?" "I could see myself as they saw me, as a little girl trying to fill shoes that were too big." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. "Helena, I fell in love with your strength, yes, but also with your compassion, your intelligence, the way you care for people, even when you try to pretend you don't." She looked at him in surprise. "You fell in love with me?" The question caught him off guard. "Of course, you didn't know? Our marriage, I always thought it was more of a strategic partnership that worked out." Daniel laughed sadly. "Helena, I came from a family that barely made ends meet. When I met you, you could have had your pick of anyone. Men with better pedigrees, family connections, bigger bank accounts. Why did you think I would agree to marry you if it weren't for love?" Tears came back to her eyes. "Because everyone always wanted something from me. My family, the executives, the suitors. There was always an agenda. And you thought I had one too." She stopped, realizing the painful truth of her own words. "I guess I was so used to being used that I forgot how to recognize when someone genuinely cared." Daniel took her hands in his. "Helena, I care. I always have. Even when we fought, even when it felt like we were strangers sharing the same house, I never stopped caring about you." That night, for the first time in months, they talked until the early hours. Helena talked about family pressures, how her father always treated her more like a successor than a daughter, how she always felt she had to be perfect to deserve love. Daniel talked about his childhood, about the shame he sometimes felt about his humble origins amidst the world of high society, about how he sometimes felt like an imposter wearing expensive suits. "You know what's ironic?" Helena said as the first ray of sunlight began to filter through the library curtains. "It took a terminal diagnosis for me to finally talk honestly with my husband." "Don't say that," Daniel said softly. "Don't sound like you've given up." "I haven't given up, but I also can't pretend reality is different than it is." She touched his face. "Promise me one thing. No matter what happens, don't let it change who you are. You're a good man, Daniel. Better than I deserved. You deserve the whole world, Helena. And I will fight for every second we have together." The Montrose mansion was abuzz with activity on Saturday morning. It was the traditional monthly family lunch, an institution Helena had maintained religiously since taking over the company. It was also the first family gathering since her diagnosis, and she felt the weight of the secret like a stone in her stomach. Roberto Montrose, her younger brother, arrived first with his wife Carla and 8-year-old son Miguel. Roberto was 2 years younger than Helena, but he always seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. As vice president of operations, he was competent and dedicated, but Helena always sensed he harbored resentment for not being born first. "Helena, you look different," Roberto observed, kissing his sister's cheek. "More relaxed?" Carla, an elegant woman with impeccably styled blonde hair, smiled politely at Helena, but her gaze went straight to Daniel. There was something about the way she looked at him that had always bothered Helena, a familiarity that felt too intimate. "Daniel, it's good to see you," Carla said, touching his arm in a way that lasted a second longer than was appropriate. "You look good. Marriage is doing you good." Daniel responded politely, but Helena noticed how he subtly moved away from Carla's touch. It was a relief to know that at least he recognized the inappropriateness of his sister-in-law's behavior. The family patriarch, Eduardo Montrose, Helena, and Roberto's father, arrived next. At 72, he was still an imposing figure, with perfectly combed white hair and blue eyes that rarely lost their focus. Since stepping down as company leader 5 years earlier, Eduardo had devoted himself to travel and personal investments, but Helena knew he still kept a watchful eye on the family business. "My daughter," he said, hugging Helena with the reserved affection that had always characterized their relationship. "How are the quarter's numbers going?" Even at family lunches, Eduardo couldn't avoid talking about business. Helena was used to it, but today the question bothered her more than usual. "They're good, Dad, but today is Saturday. How about we talk about other things?" Eduardo arched an eyebrow, surprised by the answer. Roberto and Carla exchanged a meaningful look. During lunch, served in the formal dining room with its crystal chandeliers and antique tapestries, Helena observed her family with new eyes. Roberto seemed constantly tense, as if expecting criticism that never came. Carla maintained a perfect smile, but her eyes were constantly calculating. Miguel, blissfully unaware of the adults' tensions, chattered about school and friends. "Aunt Helena," the boy said over dessert, "why don't you and Uncle Daniel ever have children? Mom said you've been married a long time." An awkward silence descended over the table. Helena felt Daniel's gaze on her, remembering the loss they'd experienced in their first year of marriage, a subject they'd never been able to properly discuss. "Miguel," Carla reprimanded gently, "those are questions you don't ask." "Okay," Helena said, surprising everyone with her calm. "Miguel, sometimes people need more time to have children. Every family is different." After lunch, Helena found herself on the porch with her father while the others played with Miguel in the garden. "You're different, daughter," Eduardo said, lighting a Cuban cigar. "More human, somehow." "Thanks, Dad, I guess." Eduardo laughed. It was a compliment. "You've always been so like me, focused, determined, sometimes even cold when necessary. But today you seem more approachable." Helena watched Daniel playing tag with Miguel, his genuine laughter echoing through the garden. "Dad, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Did you love my mother?" Eduardo paused mid-drag, surprised by the question. Helena's mother had died when she was 15, and they rarely spoke about her. "What a strange question, Helena. It's just, I married Daniel 3 years ago, and only recently did I realize that maybe I never really tried to get to know him as a person. I wonder if you and Mom went through the same thing." Edward was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother was an extraordinary woman. Intelligent, strong, but also kind in a way I could never be. When she died, I threw myself into work because it was easier than dealing with the grief. And us? You suffered because of it. Especially you. Roberto was younger, but you became too small too soon. You took on responsibilities you shouldn't have." Eduardo looked at her with something that seemed like regret. "Maybe I made you forget how to be just a person, not just an heir." Helena felt tears prick her eyes. "It's never too late to learn, right?" "No, my daughter. It is never too late." That afternoon, after everyone had left, Helena found Daniel organizing the kitchen, something that surprised her, since they had staff for that. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know, but I wanted to." He looked at her. "How do you feel after seeing your family?" "Confused, sad, hopeful." Helena laughed at her own contradiction. "Daniel, I think I wasted too much time trying to be the person everyone expected me to be." "And who are you really?" Helena thought for a moment. "I'm finding out." Marcus Almeida watched the Montrose Tower headquarters from the cafe across the street, his dark eyes calculating every movement at the building's entrance. As an investment consultant, he had specialized in identifying vulnerable companies. But this case was personal. At 35, Marcus had the polished appearance of someone who grew up with spreadsheets and corporate presentations, but beneath the professional facade lay a thirst for revenge that had simmered for decades. Beside him, his mother, Dolores Almeida, nervously stirred sugar in her coffee. At 63, she maintained a natural elegance, but her eyes held the bitterness of someone who had lost everything because of the Montrose family. "Are you sure this is the right time?" Dolores asked, her voice low but thick with emotion. "We've waited 20 years for this moment." "It's exactly the right time, Mother." Marcus didn't take his eyes off the building. "Helena Montrose has never been more vulnerable. The medical reports I've obtained through our contacts indicate that she is sick. Very sick." Dolores closed her eyes, remembering the time she worked as a financial manager for Helena's father. Eduardo Montrose had fired her on false charges of embezzlement, destroying her reputation in the market and forcing her to raise Marcus alone in precarious conditions. The injustice had shaped their lives, fueling a desire for retribution that could now finally be satisfied. "And is Carla doing her part?" "Perfectly." Marcus smiled coldly. Who would have thought two children from the same orphanage would end up infiltrating the Montrose family so well? Carla was brilliant in marrying Roberto. She has complete access to the company's financial information. In fact, Marcus and Carla had grown up together at Lar S.O. Miguel after Dolores, alone and destitute, was forced to leave her son in state care for 2 years. They had made a pact as children. One day they would make the Montrose family pay for destroying their lives. "Do you think she still has feelings for you?" Dolores asked, watching her son with motherly concern. "Carla made her choice when she married Roberto. Now we're just business partners." But there was something in his voice that suggested his feelings were more complicated than he admitted. Across town, at the Montrose mansion, Carla was finishing packing Miguel's things for school when her phone vibrated with a text from Marcus. "Meeting today at 6 p.m. usual location." She felt her stomach tighten. The encounters with Marcus were becoming more frequent, more intense. The plan they had hatched years ago was finally coming to fruition. But Carla hadn't anticipated how difficult it would be to maintain the charade after 8 years of marriage to Roberto. Roberto loved her, genuinely, deeply. Miguel saw her as the only mother he'd ever known, as Carla had come into their lives when he was just 1 year old. Sometimes, especially in quiet family moments, Carla could almost forget why she'd approached them in the first place. "Mommy, are you okay?" Miguel asked, noticing her distant expression. "Yes, I am, my love, just thinking about the day." She kissed the boy's forehead, feeling a pang of guilt. Miguel wasn't to blame for his grandparents' sins. "Can I go play at Uncle Daniel and Aunt Helena's house today?" "Not today, dear, maybe this weekend." In fact, Carla had been avoiding visits to Helena and Daniel's house. There was something about the way Daniel was looking at her lately that made her feel as if he could see through her masks. And Helena. Helena was changing, becoming more observant, more attentive to the people around her. That afternoon, Carla met Marcus at a low-key restaurant downtown. They sat at a corner table away from prying ears. "How's progress with the documents?" Marcus asked without preamble. "Roberto gave me full access to the company's financial files. I have copies of all the major contracts, audit reports, and investment strategies." Carla slid a flash drive across the desk. "It's all there." "Excellent. What about the family dynamics? Any changes?" Carla hesitated. "Helena is different, closer to Daniel. They seem to be having problems in their marriage, but recently something changed." "That doesn't matter. With the information you've provided, I can show Japanese investors that Montrose Enterprises is more vulnerable than it appears. A few strategic acquisitions, some market manipulation, and within 6 months, we'll be in control of the company. And then we fired the entire family and watched them lose everything, just like my mother did." Marcus's eyes flashed with cold fury. "Especially Edward Montrose. I want him to live long enough to see his precious empire crumble." Carla felt a chill. "Marcus, Miguel, he can't be hurt in this. He's innocent. Miguel will be fine. Maybe it's even better for him to grow up away from Montrose's corrupting influence." Marcus reached out and touched her hand. "Carla, remember what we promised each other when we were kids?" "I remember." His voice was almost a whisper. That we would make them pay. That we wouldn't let the injustice go unnoticed. His fingers tightened around hers. "We're so close, Carla. Don't leave me now." Carla looked at the man she had loved when they were teenagers, the boy who had held her hand through the cold nights at the orphanage, who had promised that one day they would have a real family. But that dream had been shattered when she realized that revenge had completely consumed the Marcus she knew. "I won't abandon you," she said finally. "But promise that no one will be physically harmed. I promise. This is about justice, not violence." As she walked back to her car, Carla couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed a line from which she could not return. Her phone rang. It was Roberto. "Hi, love. How was your day?" The kindness in his voice almost made her cry. "It was good. I'm going home now. Miguel is doing homework. I thought we could have dinner together tonight, just the two of us. That would be great." And she really meant it. As she drove through the city streets, Carla wondered if there was still time to change her mind, to confess everything to Roberto and beg for forgiveness. But then she remembered the promise she had made to Marcus, the years of humiliation they had endured, and knew it was too late to go back on it. What she didn't know was that Daniel had noticed her frequent encounters with Marcus, and that Helena was beginning to suspect there was more to her sister-in-law's life than met the eye. Chemotherapy sessions had begun 3 weeks earlier, and Helena felt as if her body was in a constant battle with itself. Sitting in the reclining chair at the cancer center, the life-saving fluid slowly dripping into her veins, she watched Daniel read a book in the chair next to her. He had insisted on accompanying her to every session, canceling important meetings and rearranging her schedule. "You don't have to stay here," she said softly, as she always did. "I know," he replied, as always, "but I want to stay." The nurse, Carmen, a stout woman with a warm smile, came over to check Helena's vital signs. "How are you feeling today, dear?" "Better than I expected," Helena admitted. "The nausea has subsided." "That's great. And you have a wonderful husband," Carmen said, winking at Daniel. "It's not every day we see such devoted partners." Helena looked at Daniel. Really looked. Over the past few weeks, she'd noticed little things that had previously gone unnoticed. How he always brought her ginger tea to help with nausea. How he'd learned to make her favorite food when she didn't have an appetite. How he held her hand during the hardest moments without ever making her feel fragile. "Daniel," she said when Carmen walked away, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Why did you really marry me?" He put down the book and looked at her in surprise. "Why are you asking this now?" "Because I need to know. I need to understand if what we're building now is real or if it's just pity." Daniel closed the book completely and leaned forward. "Helena, do you remember the first time we talked? At the corporate law conference. You were presenting on business ethics. You asked a question about social responsibility that none of the other executives had the courage to ask. Later, at the cocktail party, you came up to me and said you were impressed with how I had defended workers' rights in corporate mergers." Helena remembered vaguely. "So what? So what if you could have talked to anyone in that room? CEOs, investors, people who could have offered you million-dollar deals. But you chose to talk to an unknown lawyer who was clearly out of place amidst all that elegance." "You weren't out of place." "Yes, I was. My suit was rented, my shoes were 3 years old, and I was drinking sparkling water because I didn't know how to order a drink properly." Daniel smiled at the memory. "But you treated me like I was the most interesting person in the room." Helena felt something warm in her chest. "You were. Why? Because you were real. Authentic. Every other man I knew talked about profits and acquisitions. You talked about justice, about making a difference in people's lives. And that's why I married you, Helena. Because beneath all that executive armor, you have a heart that genuinely cares about people. You may pretend to be cold, but I saw how you treated the waiter that night, how you remembered the hostess's name, how your eyes lit up when we talked about social responsibility programs." Tears began to stream down Helena's face. "I got lost somewhere along the way." "You didn't get lost, you just hid." Daniel held her hand. "And now you're coming back." That night, at home, Helena found Daniel in the kitchen preparing dinner. She leaned against the doorframe watching him. It was strange how the disease had broken down so many barriers between them. "Daniel, do you remember the baby?" He stopped stirring the pot. It was the first time she'd mentioned the pregnancy they'd lost in their first year of marriage. "Of course I remember. I never talked to you about how I felt when we lost our son." Daniel turned off the heat and turned to her. "Helena, I felt like it was my fault. Like my body had failed me. Like I wasn't good enough to be a mother." The words came out in a rush. "And I thought you blamed me too. Helena, I never blamed you. But you became so distant afterward. We both did. It was easier to immerse ourselves in work than to deal with the pain." Daniel crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms. "I stayed away because I didn't know how to help you. I saw you suffering and felt useless. I thought you preferred space. And I thought you'd rather not see me fall apart." They held each other there in the kitchen, crying for the loss they had never properly processed, for the distance they had created, for the years wasted in misunderstandings. "Helena," Daniel said finally, "when you get better, when we get through this, would you like to try again? Have a family?" She looked at him through her tears. "Do you still want to have children with me?" "I want to have a whole life with you. With children, without children, whatever comes. I just want you." Meanwhile, across town, Marcus received a call that would change everything. "Mr. Almeida," the private investigator's voice was professional, "I have information about Helena Montrose that you requested. Say, she's sick, brain cancer. She started treatment 3 weeks ago." Marcus was silent for a long moment. He had waited 20 years for revenge, but not like this. Not against a woman facing her own mortality. "Sir, are you still there?" "I am. Keep monitoring, and keep this confidential." When he hung up the phone, Marcus stared at the photo of Helena he'd clipped from a business magazine. For the first time in years, he felt something other than anger. It was confusion, maybe even compassion. But it was too late to stop the plan he'd set in motion. Across town, Helena fell asleep in Daniel's arms for the first time in years, feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for them. Dr. Santos leafed through Helena's latest test results with an expression Daniel couldn't decipher. It was 2 in the afternoon on a rainy Tuesday, and the doctor's office seemed even gloomier than usual. "The results are mixed," the doctor finally said. "The chemotherapy is having some positive effects. The tumor hasn't grown in the last 4 weeks." Helena and Daniel exchanged a look of cautious relief. "But," Dr. Santos continued, "it hasn't decreased significantly either. We need to consider more aggressive options." "What kind of options?" Daniel asked. Dr. Santos leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together. "There's an experimental procedure being tested at Johns Hopkins. It's an extremely delicate surgery combined with a new gene therapy. The initial results are promising." "Promising how?" Helena asked, her voice hopeful for the first time in weeks. "In 70% of cases, the tumor was completely removed. The patients made a full recovery." Daniel felt his heart race. "And the other 30%? Dr. Santos hesitated. "There were various complications. Some were overcome, others..." "Other what?" Helena insisted. "In some cases, there was damage to the brain's memory centers. Partial amnesia, or in more severe cases, total memory loss." The silence that followed was deafening. Helena looked at Daniel, then back at the doctor. "What is the percentage of total memory loss?" "About 8% of patients." "But Helena, you need to understand that without some kind of intervention." "I know." Helena took a deep breath. "How long do I have to decide?" 2 weeks tops. After that, the tumor may progress beyond the point where surgery would be feasible." On the way home, Helena and Daniel remained silent, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Daniel who finally broke the silence. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking 8% is a slim chance." "Helena, 70% complete cure, Daniel. 70% chance of us having a normal life together." Daniel pulled the car over to the side of the road. "What if you're part of the 8%? What if you wake up and don't recognize me? What if you forget everything we've been through? Everything we're rebuilding?" Helena turned to him. "What if I don't have the surgery and die in the next few months? Would you rather have a Helena who doesn't remember you or no Helena at all?" It was an impossible question to answer. That night, Helena called her father. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." "Sure, daughter. Do you want me to come over?" "Yes, and Dad, bring Roberto too. It's time to tell the truth." 2 hours later, the Montrose family was gathered in the living room. Carla had stayed with Miguel, claiming he had a fever, an excuse Helena didn't entirely believe. "6 weeks ago I was diagnosed," Helena began, her voice steady despite the emotional storm inside her. "I have a brain tumor." Roberto dropped the glass of water he was holding. Eduardo went pale as a sheet. "What do you mean?" Roberto managed to say. "Why didn't they tell us before?" "Because I needed to process it first, and because I needed to reconcile with my husband before I could face the rest." Eduardo looked between Helena and Daniel, noticing how they were sitting closer than he had seen them in years. "What's the prognosis?" Eduardo asked, his executive voice masking paternal panic. Helena explained about chemotherapy, about experimental surgery, about the chances and risks. 8%, Roberto repeated. "Helena, that's too risky. And doing nothing is 100% fatal." "When do you need to decide?" Eduardo asked. 2 weeks. Roberto stood up and began pacing. "Helena, if you have this surgery and lose your memory, you might not remember how to run the company. You might not remember us." "I know. Then perhaps it's time we started thinking about succession," Edward said softly. Helena looked at her father in surprise. "Dad, Helena, whatever your decision about surgery, you can no longer carry the burden of the company alone. You need to focus on your recovery. I can take on more responsibility," Roberto offered quickly. "No," Eduardo said. "Roberto, you're excellent at operations, but strategic leadership, that requires a different perspective." "So what?" Roberto asked, a hint of irritation in his voice. Eduardo looked at Daniel. "Daniel has the legal knowledge, understands the complexities of the business, and," he paused, "has Helena's complete trust." Daniel nearly choked. "Mr. Montrose, I appreciate your trust, but..." "Daniel," Helena said softly, "would you be able to take care of the company for me?" It was a question loaded with layers of meaning. She was asking him to take care not just of the business, but of everything she had built, everything that represented her legacy. "I would do anything for you, Helena, you know that." "Then it's decided," Helena said. "If I have the surgery, Daniel will take over as interim CEO with Roberto as COO. Roberto didn't seem entirely satisfied with the arrangement, but he nodded in agreement. "What if you don't have the surgery? Then let's reorganize the company so it can function without me." Later that night, after Eduardo and Roberto had left, Helena and Daniel sat on the bed, each lost in thought. "Are you really prepared to take over the company?" Helena asked. "I'm prepared to do whatever it takes so you can focus on getting better." Helena snuggled into his arms. "Daniel, if I have the surgery and lose my memory, will you try to make me remember us?" "Helena, if you lose your memory, I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to make you fall in love with me again." "What if you can't?" Daniel kissed her softly. "Then I'll love you enough for both of us until your memory returns or until we create completely new memories." As Helena fell asleep in his arms, Daniel remained awake, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't told her about the conversation he'd had with Dr. Santos after she left the room. The doctor had been more specific about the risks. If Helena lost her memory, the chances of recovery were slim. She would likely never remember her previous life. Daniel had made a decision that would change everything, but he knew Helena would never forgive him if she found out. He wouldn't tell her about the real risk of permanent memory loss. He would let her make the decision based on hope, not despair. It was a lie born of love, but a lie nonetheless. And Daniel knew that regardless of the consequences, he would carry this secret for the rest of his life. Helena was on the porch, watching the sunrise, when Daniel found her. She had 3 days left to make her final decision about the surgery, and the tension in the house was palpable. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, placing a blanket over her shoulders. "I've been dreaming about my mother," Helena said softly. "Very vivid dreams. She's always trying to tell me something, but I can never hear her." Daniel sat beside her on the swing he'd installed the week before. "What do you think she was trying to say?" "I don't know, but in my dreams she seems at peace. Like she's telling me everything will be okay no matter what I decide." They rocked in silence for a few minutes, watching the city wake up below. "Daniel, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course. When I was little, before my mother died, I almost drowned in the lake at the family's country house. I must have been about 7 years old. I fell off the wooden bridge and I couldn't swim very well." Daniel looked at her with renewed attention. There was something about the way she told the story that made him feel as if he'd heard it before. "What happened?" "I remember sinking, seeing the sunlight growing farther and farther away, and then someone pulled me out. A boy. I never got to see his face clearly. It all happened so fast. But I remember his hands, strong but gentle, pulling me to the surface." Daniel felt a shiver. You never knew who it was?" "No. My mother said it was one of the employees' sons, but he disappeared before I could thank him. For years I've wanted to find him, to say thank you." "Why are you telling me this now?" Helena looked at him with an intensity that left him breathless. "Because in every dream I've had, that boy appears, and somehow he looks like you." Daniel felt as if the world had stopped. He remembered that day vividly. His mother worked as a seamstress for the Montrose family occasionally, and he had gone with her to the cottage. He had seen a dark-haired girl fall into the water and, without thinking, dove in to save her. Then, afraid of getting into trouble, he had run away. "Helena," he began, but she interrupted him. "Don't tell me it's a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences, especially now." Daniel looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Pure hope. "What does that mean to you?" "It means that perhaps fate has bigger plans than we understand. Perhaps you came into my life not just as my husband, but as my savior. Again. What if it's true? What if I really am that boy?" Helena smiled. The first time he'd seen her smile genuinely in weeks. "Then I trust you to save me once again. I'll do the surgery, Daniel." "Are you sure?" "I do. Because if I lose my memory, at least I know you'll be there to remind me who I am. And if I don't have the surgery," she touched his face, "I'd rather risk forgetting our story than have no chance to write new chapters." That afternoon, Helena called Dr. Santos to confirm the surgery. Meanwhile, Daniel shut himself in his office, trying to process the morning's revelation. He had saved Helena when they were children, had fallen in love with her without knowing their past connection, and now he was about to make a decision that could save her or destroy everything they had rebuilt. His phone rang. It was Dr. Santos. "Daniel, I need to speak to you in person. Can you come to the hospital? Now? It's important." An hour later, Daniel was back in the family office, but this time alone. "Daniel, I know Helena has already decided on surgery, but I need you to understand exactly what's at stake." "I understand. 8% chance of memory loss." Dr. Santos was silent for a long moment. "No, Daniel, you don't understand. I simplified the risks for Helena because I saw how desperate she was for hope." Daniel's blood froze. "What are you saying?" "The chance of total memory loss is actually 25%. And if that happens, the probability of recovery is almost zero." Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "Why did you lie to her?" "Because the truth might have made her give up her only real chance of survival." Dr. Santos leaned forward. "Daniel, without surgery, Helena has 2 months to live at most. With surgery, she has a 70% chance of a complete recovery. It's a gamble worth taking, even if she might completely forget who she is." Even so, Daniel left the hospital feeling as if he were carrying the weight of the world. Helena had made her decision based on incomplete information. He could tell her the truth and possibly change her mind, condemning her to death. Or he could keep the secret and hope she was among the 75% who would emerge from surgery with their memories intact. When he arrived home, he found Helena in the kitchen cooking her favorite risotto recipe. "How was your day?" she asked, kissing him on the cheek. Daniel looked at her. Really looked. He saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had rediscovered, the woman he could have lost completely in a matter of days. "It was good," he lied. "Helena, are you sure about the surgery?" "Absolutely." She smiled at him. "We have a whole life to live together, Daniel. A whole life." Daniel hugged her, breathing in her scent, memorizing the feeling of holding her in his arms. "I love you, Helena. More than you can imagine." I love you too, and no matter what happens, that will never change. If only she knew how wrong she could be. The week before the surgery passed in a blur of medical preparations and stolen moments. Helena had decided to continue working until the last moment, a decision Daniel initially questioned but later understood as her way of maintaining normalcy. "Helena," Roberto said during an executive meeting, "are you sure you don't want to delegate more responsibilities now?" "Roberto, the surgery is in 3 days. Until then, I'm the one running this company." Daniel watched the interaction between the brothers, noticing the underlying tension. Roberto was visibly nervous, and not just because of Helena's condition. There was something else, something Daniel couldn't quite put his finger on. After the meeting, Daniel found himself alone with Roberto in the hallway. "How is Carla dealing with all this?" Roberto seemed to hesitate before answering. "She's worried. We all are." "And Miguel?" "We haven't told him yet. Carla thinks it's best to wait until we know the results of the surgery." There was something about the way Roberto avoided his gaze that bothered Daniel. "Roberto, is everything okay at home?" "Of course. Why do you ask?" "I don't know, you seem tense, besides the obvious situation." Roberto forced a smile. "It's just concern for Helena. You understand." But Daniel wasn't convinced. He'd noticed other strange things in recent weeks. Carla had canceled several family dinners, claiming Miguel was sick. When she did show up, she seemed distracted and nervous. And then there were those phone calls she'd get that made her retreat to speak privately. That afternoon, Helena called Daniel to her office. "I need to show you something," she said, opening a safe hidden behind a painting. From inside, she removed several sealed envelopes. "What is that?" "These are letters. One for you, one for my father, one for Roberto, one for Miguel." She held the envelopes with reverent care. In case the surgery doesn't go well." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Helena, I needed to write down everything I want to say in case I don't get another chance." She held the envelope out to him. "This is yours, but don't open it unless—" "I'm not going to open it," Daniel said firmly, "because you'll come out of this surgery and you'll be able to tell me everything in person." Helena smiled sadly. "Hope is a beautiful thing, isn't it? It's the only thing we have." That night they had dinner at home, a simple meal that Helena had insisted on preparing herself. There were no staff, no television, just the two of them, and the intimacy they had rediscovered. "Daniel," Helena said as they finished their dessert, "do you regret anything in our life together?" "I regret taking so long to really get to know you." "What about you?" "I regret letting fear stop me from being vulnerable with you." She took his hand. "But I don't regret anything else. Not the fights, not the misunderstandings, not the pain. It all led us to this moment. This moment. This moment when I know with absolute certainty that you are the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, be it long or short." They made love that night with desperate intensity, as if it were the last time. And perhaps it was, Daniel thought as he watched Helena fall asleep in his arms. If she lost her memory, the woman sleeping there might wake up as a stranger. Meanwhile, across town, Carla was having a very different conversation with Marcus. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked, her voice thick with doubt. "Helena is sick, Marcus. Seriously sick. And does that change what Eduardo Montrose did to my mother? But Helena is not to blame for this." Marcus was silent for a long moment. In the past few weeks, ever since he'd learned of Helena's illness, he'd struggled with conflicting feelings. The revenge he'd planned for so long no longer tasted the same when directed at someone already suffering. "Carla," he said finally, "if we give up now, we'll never have another chance. Maybe some chances shouldn't be taken. It's too late to develop conscience now." But there was less conviction in his voice than before. Carla looked at the man she had loved, still loved in a way, and saw not the brave boy she had known at the orphanage, but a man consumed by bitterness. "Marcus, when this is all over, when you have your revenge, what will you have but ashes? I will have justice. No, you will be alone. And I—" She paused, tears beginning to flow. "I will have betrayed a family that accepted me, a man who genuinely loves me, and a child who calls me mother. Carla, no. I'm tired, Marcus. I'm tired of living a lie. I'm tired of hurting innocent people because of past pain." She got up to leave, but Marcus grabbed her arm. If you leave me now, I'll tell Roberto everything. About us, about the plan, about who you really are. Carla looked at him with a mixture of sadness and contempt. Do whatever you want, Marcus. But don't count on me to destroy this family. When she left the restaurant, Marcus was left alone, realizing that he had lost not only his partner in his revenge plan, but also the only person who still cared about the boy he had once been. The next morning, Helena woke early for a last walk in the garden. Daniel found her there, sitting on the swing, looking at the roses she had planted years ago. "Ready?" he asked softly. "Ready," she replied, but when she stood up, he saw tears in her eyes. "Helena, if you've changed your mind." "I haven't changed. It's just..." She looked around the garden, the house, everything she might be seeing for the last time with memories intact. "It's hard to leave behind a whole life. You're not leaving it behind, you're fighting to keep it." Helena kissed him, deeply, desperately. "If I forget, Daniel, remind me of this moment. Make me remember what it's like to be loved by you. You'll never forget this, I promise." But as they drove to the hospital, Daniel carried with him Helena's unopened letter and the terrible weight of the truth she didn't know. In a few hours, everything would change. For better or worse, nothing would ever be the same again. Daniel never imagined the silence could be so deafening. Sitting in the surgical center waiting room for 8 hours, he had gone through every conceivable stage of anxiety. Eduardo stood beside him, equally tense, while Roberto paced nervously. "The surgery should have ended 2 hours ago," Roberto muttered for the 10th time. "Complicated surgeries can take longer," Eduardo replied, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Daniel stared at the sealed envelope in his hands, Helena's letter to him. He was tempted to open it several times, but he always remembered her words. Open only if. At 6:30 p.m., Dr. Santos finally appeared in the waiting room. His expression was carefully neutral, the kind of face doctors learn to make when the news is difficult. "How is she?" Daniel asked before the doctor even sat down. "The surgery was successful. We were able to completely remove the tumor." The 3 men let out simultaneous sighs of relief. "But?" Eduardo asked, realizing there was more. "But Helena still hasn't fully woken up. And when she did briefly wake up, Dr. Santos paused. "She didn't recognize any of us. She didn't remember where she was or why she was there." Daniel felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "Is it temporary?" "We hope so. Sometimes there's post-operative confusion that resolves itself within days or weeks. But it's also possible that..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "Can I see her?" "You can, but she probably won't recognize you. I recommend you prepare yourselves mentally for this." Daniel walked up to the ICU room on shaky legs. Helena was hooked up to several monitors, devices emitting rhythmic beeps that confirmed she was alive. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with a vacant expression he'd never seen before. "Helena?" he said softly, approaching the bed. She turned her head toward the voice, but when her eyes met his, there was no recognition. It was like looking at a stranger who shared the face of the woman he loved. "Hi," she said in a weak, confused voice. Are you a doctor?" Daniel felt his heart shatter. "No, I'm Daniel, your husband." Helena frowned as if trying to process information that didn't make sense. "Husband? I'm sorry, but I don't remember you." "It's okay," Daniel said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "You've had surgery. It's normal to be confused." "I don't remember the surgery. I don't remember anything, really." Tears began to form in her eyes. "Why can't I remember anything?" Daniel desperately wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but he knew that to Helena he was a stranger. Any intimacy would only frighten her more. "It's going to be okay," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. In the weeks that followed, Helena remained in the hospital for observation and neurological tests. Daniel spent every day there, desperately searching for any sign that his wife still existed somewhere inside the woman who looked at him with polite strangeness. "You come to visit me every day?" Helena observed one afternoon. "Why?" "Because I love you," Daniel replied simply. "But I don't remember you. I don't remember loving you back." "I know, but that doesn't change how I feel." Helena studied his face curiously. "What were we like? Before the surgery?" Daniel thought carefully before answering. We were complicated. We had our problems, like all couples. But in the last few weeks before the surgery, we had found our way back to each other. Tell me about our first time together. Daniel smiled, remembering. It was at a conference on corporate law. You asked a question no one else had the courage to ask, and then you approached me at the cocktail party. We talked all night about justice, social responsibility, and how to change the world through business. That looks nice. It was. You were the most intelligent and passionate person I had ever met. Helena touched her head, where her hair was beginning to grow back after the surgery. I wish I could remember this. I wish I could remember being in love. It was these small openings that kept Daniel going. Moments when Helena seemed genuinely interested in learning about the life she had lost. Dr. Santos was honest about the prognosis. After 6 weeks, Helena's chances of regaining her memories were slim. She would have to learn to live as an essentially new person. She can learn to love you again, the doctor told Daniel privately. But it will be a love based on who you are now, not who you were. Daniel struggled with this reality every day. The woman in the hospital looked like Helena, spoke like Helena, but was fundamentally different. More cautious, less self-assured, without the executive armor the original Helena had worn for so long. In some ways, she was sweeter, more open, but Daniel felt as if he were mourning someone who was still alive. One afternoon, Roberto found him in the hospital corridor. Daniel, we need to talk about the company. What does the company have? Helena will be discharged next week. She can't go back to work, at least not right now. And you? You've been absent almost completely. Daniel ran his hands through his hair. In recent weeks, Montrose Enterprises had been operating virtually alone, with Roberto taking over operational leadership. You're right, I know I have responsibilities. Daniel, I'm not criticizing. I completely understand why you've been here every day. But the company needs leadership. Either you formally take over as Helena wanted or what? Or maybe it's time for me to take over. I'm a Montrose. I've known the business forever. There was something about the way Roberto said this that bothered Daniel. An anticipation, as if he had been waiting for this opportunity. Roberto, Helena is still the CEO. She can still recover. Can you? Daniel, you saw her yesterday trying to remember how to use a fork properly. She's not going back to running a business empire. The casual cruelty of the remark made Daniel see red. That's my wife you're talking about. And she's my sister. I love her as much as you do. But I also need to be realistic. Daniel looked at Roberto and realized there was an agenda behind his apparent concern. Maybe there always had been. I'll formally take over as CEO next week, Daniel said firmly, just as Helena wanted. Roberto nodded, but Daniel didn't miss the flash of irritation in his eyes. That night, alone in the apartment he had rented near the hospital, Daniel finally opened Helena's letter. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper and began to read. My dear Daniel, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong. I'm sorry to leave you, however it happened. I want you to know that the past few weeks have been the happiest of my adult life. Not because of the illness, but because of the way it forced us to meet again. You reminded me of who I truly am beneath all the expectations and responsibilities. If I died, I want you to keep living. Get married again, have children, be happy. You deserve all the love in the world. If I survived but lost my memory, I want you to know that you can let me go. Don't feel obligated to stay with a stranger because of promises made to a woman who no longer exists. But if you decide to stay, if you decide to try to help me remember or start over, know that it will be the greatest proof of love anyone has ever given me. You saved me once when we were kids. If you're really that boy from the lake, then you've already saved me twice. Don't feel obligated to do it a third time. I love you, Daniel. The Helena you knew, the one who fought with you, the one who reconciled with you, the one who made the decision to have this surgery, she loved you more than life itself. Whatever the future brings, thank you for showing me what it's like to be truly loved. Forever yours, Helena. Daniel folded the letter and held it to his chest, crying for the first time since the surgery. Helena had given him permission to leave, to start his life over. But as he stood there alone and leaving, he knew he couldn't. Not while there was even a chance, however small, that some part of the woman he loved still existed. He would return to the hospital the next day, and the next, and the day after that. Because even if the Helena he had known was gone, maybe he could learn to love the person she had become. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn to love him too. The Montrose mansion felt strange to Helena when Daniel brought her home 3 weeks after her hospital discharge. She wandered through the rooms like a tourist in her own life, touching objects that should have been familiar, but that evoked no memories. "This was our room," Daniel said softly when they reached the upper floor. Helena looked around the elegant space, noticing 2 separate beds. "Why do we have separate beds?" Daniel hesitated. We were going through a difficult time before your illness. I can sleep in the guest room if you prefer." "No," Helena said quickly. "I mean, if we were married, there's no point in you sleeping anywhere else. Unless you prefer." "I don't prefer it, but I also don't want to make you uncomfortable." Helena sat on the edge of the bed, fingering the fabric of the comforter. "Daniel, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Do you still love me? The person I am now, not the person I was." It was an impossible question to answer honestly. Daniel struggled daily with his feelings for the new Helena. She was kind, vulnerable, curious about the world in a way the original Helena never was. But she also wasn't the woman he'd fallen in love with. "I'm getting to know you again," he said carefully. "And I really like the person you are now. But it's not love. Not yet. But it might become so." Helena nodded, appreciating the honesty. "I like you too. There's something about you that makes me feel safe, like you matter, even if I can't remember why." That first week at home, they established a careful routine. Daniel worked mostly from home, gradually assuming his responsibilities as CEO while trying to help Helena readjust. She spent hours looking through photo albums, listening to stories about her former life, desperately trying to find some spark of recognition. "Tell me about our wedding," she asked one night over dinner. "It was small, elegant. You insisted it be in the church where your parents were married. You were nervous, more nervous than I've ever seen you. Why? You said later that it was because you really cared about that day, that it wasn't just a social obligation for you." Helena smiled sadly. "I wish I could remember feeling that way. Maybe one day you'll feel that way again." It was Roberto who complicated the delicate peace they had established. He showed up at the house a week later, ostensibly to visit Helena, but Daniel immediately sensed an agenda. "Helena, it's good to see you home," Roberto said, hugging his sister with genuine affection. "Roberto," Helena said, trying the name. "You're my brother." "Yes." His younger and infinitely more charming brother. Helena laughed, and Daniel was surprised to feel a pang of jealousy. She had laughed naturally with Roberto in a way she rarely did with him. "How are you adjusting?" Roberto asked. "It's strange, like living in someone else's life. Daniel has been very patient with me." "I'm sure you do." Roberto looked at Daniel with an expression that wasn't entirely friendly. "Actually, Helena, I need to talk to you both about the company." "What company?" Helena asked confusedly. We're the CEO of Montrose Enterprises, one of the largest department store chains in the country." Helena looked at Daniel in shock. "You didn't tell me that." "I thought it would be too much to process initially," Daniel replied. "Helena," Roberto continued, "with you incapacitated, someone needs to take over permanent leadership of the company. Daniel has done the best he can, but what?" Daniel asked, his voice taking on a warning tone. "But you're not a Montrose. Investors, business partners, they're starting to question whether you have the legitimate authority to make long-term decisions." Helena looked between the two men, sensing the tension. "What are you two really discussing?" "We're discussing who should run the company you built," Daniel said. "What did I build?" "Did I build a company?" "You turned a family business into an empire," Daniel said proudly. "You're brilliant, Helena." "Or were." "It was," Roberto repeated. "But that woman isn't the same person anymore. Helena, you can barely remember how to make a phone call. How can you run a corporation?" Roberto's words were cruel but not entirely false. Helena had struggled with basic tasks since the surgery, but Daniel saw how they hurt her. "Roberto, I think you better go," Daniel said coldly. "Why? Because I'm being honest about the situation? Helena has the right to know the truth about her condition." Helena has the right to recover in peace without being constantly reminded of her limitations. Helena stood up abruptly from the table. Stop. Stop talking about me as if I weren't here. The two men were silent. Roberto, you're right. I don't remember how to run a company. I barely remember how to use a cell phone. But that doesn't mean I'm useless. She turned to Daniel. And you, stop treating me like I'm made of glass. I can handle the truth about my own life. After Roberto left, Helena sat in the library, leafing through company reports that Daniel had brought home. I can't understand any of this, she admitted when he joined her. That's understandable. These are complex concepts. Daniel, can I try? Go to the company, see if anything triggers a memory? Daniel hesitated. The idea of bringing Helena into the corporate world, where she would be constantly reminded of everything she'd lost, seemed cruel. But perhaps it was exactly what she needed. If that's what you want. Yeah, I need to understand who I was, even if I can't remember. The next day, Daniel took Helena to Montrose Tower. She gazed at the imposing building in awe. I worked here? You were in charge of all this. In the elevator going up to the 30th floor, Helena looked nervous. What if I don't make it? What if it's obvious to everyone that I'm not the same person anymore? Then we'll deal with this together. When the elevator doors opened, revealing the executive office, Helena took a few hesitant steps inside. Marina, the secretary, was waiting with a careful smile. Mrs. Montrose, it's good to have you back. Hi, Helena said shyly. Do you know me? I've been working for you for 5 years. Helena looked around the luxurious office. This was my office. It still is, Daniel said softly. Helena walked to the executive desk, running her fingers over the polished wooden surface. It looks intimidating. You've never been intimidated by anything, Marina said gently. Can I sit in the chair? Daniel and Marina exchanged a look. Seeing Helena ask permission to sit in her own chair was a real treat. Sure, Daniel said. Helena sat carefully in the leather chair, looking out the window that offered a panoramic view of the city. For a moment, there was only silence. I don't remember anything, she said finally, tears in her voice. Nothing. I should feel powerful here, connected to something, but I just feel lost. Daniel walked over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's okay. No pressure. But there's pressure, isn't there? All these people depend on me, and I don't even know who I am. It was then that she saw a framed photo of Daniel on the table. It was a casual snapshot of him smiling during what appeared to be a picnic. Why do you have a picture of me on your desk? Daniel asked, surprised. He didn't remember the picture. Helena picked up the painting, studying the image. I don't know, but looking at this picture, I feel something. Not a memory exactly, but a feeling. What kind of feeling? Affection. As if the person in this photo is important to me. She looked at Daniel. Very important. It was the first time since the surgery that Helena had shown any emotional connection to her previous life. Daniel felt a cautious hope spark in his chest. Can I take the picture home? She asked. Of course. It's yours. As they walked home, Helena held the photo in her lap, occasionally glancing at it and then at Daniel. Daniel, she said finally, I don't remember loving you, but looking at this picture, I think I did. Yes, Daniel said softly. You did. And can I learn to love again? Daniel parked the car and turned to look at her. Helena, you don't need to force yourself to feel anything for me. I'm not forcing myself. I'm asking if it's possible. If you'd be willing to get to know me again. Not as your lost wife, but as the person I am now. Daniel looked into her eyes and saw something that hadn't been there before. Hope. I'd love to meet the person you are now. Then maybe we can start over. Not erase the past, because that's impossible, but build something new. Daniel held her hand, and for the first time since the surgery, the touch felt natural, not forced. I'd like that, he said. That night, for the first time since Helena had returned home, they slept in the same bed. Not as husband and wife, but as two people beginning to discover a possible connection. It was a fragile beginning, but it was a beginning. 3 months had passed since Helena had returned home, and slowly a new dynamic had established itself between her and Daniel. It wasn't the marriage they'd had before, but it was something genuine and growing. Helena hadn't yet regained her memories, but she had developed genuine feelings for the man who cared for her so patiently. Marcus watched the Montrose house from his car parked across the street. His plans had changed drastically since learning about Helena's condition. The revenge he'd planned for years now seemed hollow, especially after Carla abandoned him. But pressure from his mother, Dolores, and years of accumulated bitterness still pushed him forward. "Today's the day," he muttered to himself, checking the time. Daniel had left for a company meeting, leaving Helena alone with just one employee. It was the perfect opportunity. Marcus had abandoned the idea of destroying the company. It would take too long and frankly wouldn't give him the immediate satisfaction he sought. Instead, he decided on a more direct approach. He would kidnap Helena, force a sham marriage that would give him legal rights to the family fortune, and then reveal his true identity to Eduardo Montrose. Seeing the patriarch realize he'd lost everything to the son of the woman he'd destroyed would be revenge enough. Helena was in the garden when Marcus approached. She was physically weaker since the surgery, more vulnerable. It wouldn't be difficult to convince her to accompany him. "Helena Montrose," Marcus said, putting on a charming smile. Helena turned around confused. "Yes? Can I help you?" "My name is Marcus Almeida. I'm an investment consultant and I work with your company. Daniel asked me to come pick you up. There was an emergency." "What kind of emergency?" Helena asked, her voice full of concern. "Your brother Roberto had an accident. Daniel is in the hospital with him and asked me to bring you immediately." Helena turned pale. Even though she didn't fully remember Roberto, she had developed a genuine affection for him in the last few weeks. "Is he okay?" "She's stable, but I want to see her. My car is outside." Helena hesitated only for a moment before accepting. Her trust in people had increased since her memory loss, one of the consequences of not remembering being betrayed or hurt before. By the time he realized they were going in the wrong direction, it was too late. Marcus had locked the car doors and his expression had completely changed. "Where are we going?" Helena asked, panic starting to set in. "To a place where we can talk without interruptions." "Who are you really?" Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "I'm someone your family destroyed long ago, and now it's time for reckoning." Marcus took Helena to a secluded cabin on the outskirts of town, a place he had rented specifically for this purpose. Helena was visibly terrified, but she tried to remain calm. "What do you want?" she asked as he made her sit on a chair in the simple room. "I want justice," Marcus replied, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "Your family ruined my mother. Edward Montrose falsely accused her of theft, destroyed her reputation and forced us to live in poverty. I don't remember that." "Of course you don't remember. You probably didn't even know we existed. To you, we were just disposable people." Helena tried to process the information. "If this really happened, I apologize. But I can't be held responsible for something I don't remember doing. Convenient amnesia, isn't it?" "It's not convenient," Helena said more firmly than Marcus expected. "It's devastating. I wake up every day not knowing who I am, not recognizing the people I should love. So don't tell me my condition is convenient." Marcus was quiet for a moment, not expecting that answer. "Regardless," he said finally, "you're going to help me get what I deserve. Let's get married." "What?" "A legal marriage that will give me rights to the Montrose fortune. Then I'll tell your father exactly who I am and watch as he realizes he's lost everything to me. I'm already married, with a man who isn't family. When you disappear and are later found married to me, who do you think will inherit control of the company?" Helena looked at him with contempt. "You're crazy if you think I'm going to cooperate with this. You will cooperate because the alternative is worse for everyone involved." Meanwhile, Daniel had returned home to find his employee in a panic. Helena had left with a man who claimed to work for the company, but Daniel hadn't sent anyone. Immediately, he knew something was terribly wrong. "What kind of man?" Daniel asked, already dialing the police number. "Tall, dark hair, very well dressed. He said you were at the hospital with Roberto." Daniel called Roberto, who was perfectly fine at home. He then called Eduardo, the police, and began mobilizing every possible resource to find Helena. Back at the cabin, Helena realized that her only chance was to buy time and try to better understand her kidnapper. "Marcus," she said quietly, "can I ask you a question?" He can. How do you know your mother didn't do what my father accused her of doing? Marcus turned to her angrily. Because I know her. She's an honest woman who would never steal from anyone. But you were a kid then, right? How can you be sure? I can. Marcus stopped, realizing that Helena was trying to plant doubts in his mind. I'm not trying to justify anything, Helena continued. I'm just saying that maybe there's more to the story than you knew. Maybe it would be worth finding out the truth before ruining more lives. The truth is, your family destroyed mine, and now you want to destroy my family for revenge. Can't you see this just perpetuates the cycle? Marcus was silent, contemplating his words. Marcus, Helena said gently, I don't remember being a Montrose. I don't remember privilege or power, but I do remember waking up in the hospital not knowing who I was, with a strange man telling me he was my husband. I remember the fear, the confusion, the loss. Why are you telling me this? Because maybe you understand what it's like to lose everything. You lost your mother to injustice. I lost my identity to illness. None of us chose our situation. Marcus looked at her with a softer expression. You aren't what I expected. What did you expect? A spoiled and arrogant princess. Maybe I was like that before. I don't know. But I'm not now. Helena took a deep breath. Marcus, you can have your revenge. You can force me to marry you. You can destroy my family. But in the end, you'll still be a bitter man who lost the only thing that truly matters. What thing? The chance to be happy. At that moment, they heard cars approaching. Daniel had tracked Helena's cell phone through GPS and arrived with the police. Last chance, Helena, Marcus said, pulling out a gun. Marry me now or what? You're going to kill me? And then what will you have accomplished? Marcus looked at the gun in his hands as if seeing it for the first time. I don't know anymore. The cabin door banged open and Daniel walked in, followed by the police officers. Helena! Daniel shouted, running towards her. Marcus turned the gun towards Daniel, but Helena threw herself in front of him, screaming, No! The gun went off, but Helena had pushed Daniel aside. The bullet hit the wall behind them. Marcus, shocked by his own actions, dropped the gun. I didn't mean to, he mumbled as the officers arrested him. Daniel held Helena in his arms, both of them trembling. Are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm fine, she said, but then looked at him with a strange expression. Daniel? What it was? I remember something. When you came running in here for a moment, I remembered loving you. Daniel felt his heart stop. What did you say? It was like a flash, a memory of what it was like to be in love with you. Tears began to stream down her face. It didn't last long, but for a second I was Helena again. You're Helena. As the police led Marcus away, Helena held Daniel's face in her hands. I don't remember everything yet, but I remember this. You are my savior. Always have been. In the weeks following the kidnapping, Helena remained under medical observation. The trauma had triggered something in her brain. Small flashes of memories began to return, fragmented and sporadic, but definitely real. It's like seeing pieces of a puzzle, she explained to Dr. Santos during an appointment. I can't see the whole picture yet, but I recognize some pieces. This is very encouraging, the doctor said. Emotional shock can sometimes reactivate neural connections that seemed lost. Daniel was there as always, holding Helena's hand. What else do you remember? I remember arguments. We fought a lot before my illness, didn't we? Daniel nodded. We fought. About work, about expectations, about how we'd lost each other. And I remember a baby. Helena touched her stomach. We lost a baby. Yes, in the first year of marriage. Tears welled up in her eyes. I blamed myself, didn't I? I thought it was my fault. It wasn't anyone's fault, Helena. These things happen. But at the time, I felt like it. I remember that feeling now. Emptiness. Inadequacy. It was painful to see Helena reliving emotional trauma, but Daniel knew it was part of the healing process. Meanwhile, the investigation into Marcus had revealed more of the story. Dolores Almeida was questioned and, with her son's arrest, finally told the full truth. Eduardo Montrose came to visit Helena a few days later, carrying a folder of old documents. Father, Helena said when he entered the hospital room, you seem Distraught. Helena, I need to tell you about Marcus Almeida and his mother. What about them? Eduardo sat down heavily. I investigated his allegations after his arrest. Dolores Almeida had indeed worked for us for 25 years. And she was fired on charges of embezzlement. Were the accusations true? Eduardo was silent for a long moment. At first, I believed they were. The evidence seemed clear. But now, looking back, I think it might have been a mistake. Or worse. Worse how? Someone may have fabricated the evidence to incriminate Dolores. Daniel leaned forward. Who would do that? I don't know. But if Dolores was innocent, then I ruined her and her son's lives for nothing. Eduardo looked at Helena with deep regret. And that led to all this revenge that almost cost you your life. Helena processed the information. Dad, are you going to do something to make up for it? I've already started. I've offered Dolores substantial compensation, a formal apology, and I'm trying to get the charges officially dropped. What about Marcus? Marcus will still have to answer for the kidnapping. But, Helena, I understand his anger now. If someone had done to you what I did to his mother, Father, you acted based on the information you had at the time. The mistake was terrible, but it wasn't malicious. Eduardo looked at his daughter with renewed admiration. When you lost your memory, I thought I'd lost the strong woman I raised. But you're showing a wisdom and compassion that perhaps the previous Helena didn't have. Maybe losing my memory helped me gain perspective. Roberto arrived shortly after Eduardo left, and Helena immediately noticed that he seemed nervous. How are you feeling? He asked. Better. Some memories are coming back. Roberto visibly tensed. What kind of memories? Fragments, conversations, feelings. Why is there something specific you expected me to remember? No, of course not. It's just... Helena, there's something I need to tell you. Daniel and Helena exchanged glances. Carla and we broke up. What? Helena asked, genuinely surprised. Why? Roberto hesitated. She was involved with Marcus Almeida. Daniel straightened. What do you mean involved? They've known each other since they were children. They grew up in the same orphanage after Marcus's mother was forced to leave him there for a few years. Apparently, they've been plotting some kind of revenge against our family for years. Helena felt a shock of recognition. I remember being suspicious of her. There was something about the way she acted that bothered me. Carla confessed everything after Marcus's arrest. She had infiltrated our family by marrying me, passing confidential company information to him for years. My God, Daniel muttered. She had access to everything. Yes, but Helena... Roberto looked at his sister. She said she regretted it, especially after she learned about your illness. Apparently, she tried to convince Marcus to give up on the plan. Where is she now? She left. She took Miguel, who is not biologically my son, by the way. She left a letter saying that she could not continue living a lie and that she was going to try to rebuild her life far from here. Helena felt a mixture of anger and pity. And how are you dealing with this? Devastated, to be honest. I loved her, Helena. I really did. And Miguel? I raised him like my own son since he was a baby. You can try to keep in touch with Miguel. Even if Carla lied about other things, the love you feel for him is real. Roberto nodded, fighting back tears. Helena, there's one more thing you need to know. What? During your illness, I tried to use the situation to gain more control of the company. I was resentful because you were always your father's favorite, always seen as the natural heir. When you became ill, a part of me saw it as an opportunity. Daniel frowned, remembering the tense conversations he had had with Roberto. But seeing you now, seeing how you faced all of this with dignity and strength, Roberto paused. I realized that you deserve to be the leader of the family. You always have. And when you fully recover, I want you to know that you have my full support. Helena reached out to her brother. Roberto, we all make mistakes when we're scared or hurt. The important thing is to learn from them. After Roberto left, Helena turned to Daniel. Did you know? About Roberto trying to take over the company? Daniel hesitated. I suspected. He was eager for me to step away from leadership. And you didn't tell me because you didn't want me to worry. Because you already had enough problems to deal with. Helena took his hand. Daniel, One of the things I'm remembering about our marriage is that we stopped communicating properly. You don't need to shield me from difficult information. I need you to be honest with me always. You're right. I promise to be more transparent from now on. And I promise to trust you enough to share my fears and worries. That night, alone in the hospital room, Helena snuggled into Daniel's arms. You know what's weird? She said. What? I remember now what our relationship was like before my illness. Distant, formal, full of misunderstandings. But the relationship we've built since my surgery, it feels more real somehow. Like this? Before, we loved each other despite our roles. The CEO and the general counsel, the heiress and the ambitious husband. Now we know each other as people. You saw me at my worst when I didn't even know who I was, and you chose to stay anyway. Helena, and I learned to love you not because of what you represented in my life, but because of who you truly are. Kind, patient, protective, but also honest and strong. Daniel kissed her softly. So maybe in a strange way we needed to go through all of this to find our way to each other. Maybe so. Helena smiled. You saved my life in so many ways, Daniel. When we were kids at the lake, when you stayed with me during treatment, when you helped me rebuild my identity after surgery. Actually, I think we saved each other. Helena agreed, feeling more complete than she had in a long time. Not because she had recovered all her memories, but because she had found something even more valuable. A truer version of herself and a deeper, more authentic love than she had known before. 6 months after her kidnapping, Helena stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting a sleek navy blue dress. It was her first day back in the office as CEO of Montrose Enterprises, not just as the heiress who had inherited the position, but as the woman who had chosen to claim it. Are you ready for this? Daniel asked, watching her reflection in the mirror. I don't know if anyone is ever completely ready to take back their own life, Helena replied, but I'm willing to try. Her memories had gradually returned over the months. Not all of them, there were still gaps, especially from the more recent years before her illness, but enough for her to feel connected to her former identity, though changed by her experiences. Dr. Santos had explained that her recovery was remarkable. Cases like yours are rare, he had said at her last appointment. The combination of the emotional trauma of the kidnapping and the neural reconstruction work you two did together created new pathways in the brain. In some ways, your cognitive capacity is even better than before the surgery. At the office, Marina greeted her with a genuine smile and tears in her eyes. Welcome back, Mrs. Montrose. For real this time. Thank you, Marina. Let's work together to rebuild all this. It would be an honor. Helena sat in her executive chair, but this time she didn't feel intimidated. She felt like she belonged there, not by birthright, but by choice and ability. His first meeting was with Roberto, who had officially taken over as COO and was doing an exemplary job. How's the financial situation? She asked, reviewing the reports he had prepared. Surprisingly good considering all the turmoil. Daniel did an excellent job keeping operations running during his absence. Helena smiled. He's good at what he does. Helena, Roberto said, hesitating. I wanted to thank you. Why? For giving me a second chance. I know I didn't deserve it after how I acted when you were sick. Roberto, we all face our demons differently. The important thing is that we learn and grow. And Carla, any news? Helena had maintained discreet contact with Carla through a private investigator, mainly to ensure that Miguel was okay. She's working as a nurse in a small town in the countryside. Miguel is doing well, attending a good school. Perhaps one day, when the wounds have healed more, you can resume some kind of contact. Roberto nodded, still carrying the pain of betrayal, but beginning to accept the possibility of forgiveness. At the end of her first day back at work, Helena found Daniel waiting for her in the lobby. How was it? He asked, kissing her on the cheek. Strange, but good. I remember how to do it, but I also see everything with different eyes now. Different how? Before I led out of fear of failure, fear of disappointment, fear of not being good enough. Now I lead because I choose to, because I believe I can make a difference. They walked to the car together, comfortable in the shared silence. Daniel, Helena said as they pulled out of the parking lot, do you remember when you asked me if I wanted children? When you thought I might die? I remember. Do you still feel that way? Daniel looked at her in surprise. Of course. Why do you ask? Helena smiled, placing her hand on her stomach. Because we might not have to wait much longer. The car almost veered off the road as Daniel processed her words. Are you pregnant? I found out this morning. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Daniel pulled the car over to the side of the road, his hands shaking. Helena, after everything you've been through, is it safe? Dr. Santos said there is no reason to worry. My recovery is complete and physically I am healthier than I have been in years. Daniel kissed her, tears of joy streaming down his face. I love you so much. I love you both so much. 3. Helena corrected with a mysterious smile. 3? Twins. Apparently we've decided to make up for lost time. Daniel laughed, a deep, joyful laugh that echoed through the car. Of course they're twins. With our luck, it couldn't be just one baby. That night they had dinner with Eduardo, who was overjoyed with the news that he was going to be a grandfather. You know, he said, raising a glass of wine. Helena was drinking sparkling water. I've always been proud to be a Montrose. We've built an empire, we've accumulated wealth, we've earned respect. But seeing the two of you together, seeing the strength you've shown, the way you've supported each other, that makes me prouder than any deal I've ever made. Daddy, Helena said softly, about Dolores Almeida. How is she handling everything? Better than I expected. She accepted our apology and financial compensation. She said she wants to use the money to open a shelter for single mothers and their children. What about Marcus? He's serving his sentence but in a minimum security prison because of his cooperation with authorities. Dolores visits him regularly. She told me that for the first time in years he seems to be finding peace. Sometimes, Helena reflected, the worst situations can lead to the best outcomes if we learn the right lessons. 3 months later, Helena and Daniel renewed their vows in an intimate ceremony in their garden. It wasn't legally required, but they both felt they wanted to symbolically mark the beginning of their new life together. Helena looked radiant in a simple dress that clung to her growing belly. Daniel couldn't stop smiling. Helena, he said during the vows they had written together, when we first married, I promised to love you in sickness and in health. I didn't know I would be tested so deeply so soon. But now I know that my love for you doesn't depend on shared memories or common history. It depends on who you are, on your strength, on your kindness, on your capacity to grow and forgive. Daniel, Helena replied, her hands in his. You taught me that true love isn't just being with someone in the good times. It's choosing to stay when all seems lost. It's building bridges when there are only chasms. It's believing in the best of someone even when they've forgotten the best of themselves. The priest, a family friend, smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife again. You may kiss, he said. Again. 6 months later, Helena gave birth to 2 healthy babies, a girl they named Clara, in honor of Helena's mother, and a boy they named Miguel, a silent tribute to the boy Roberto had raised as a son. As Helena held the babies in the hospital, Daniel by her side, she thought about everything they had overcome to reach this moment. Do you regret anything? Daniel asked, echoing a question she had asked months before. I don't regret the illness because it brought us here. I don't regret the memory loss because it allowed me to know you again. I don't even regret the kidnapping because it showed me that our love is strong enough to overcome anything. And I don't regret saving a dark-haired girl from a lake all those years ago, Daniel said, kissing her forehead. Because apparently, fate had bigger plans for us. Helena laughed softly. Do you believe in fate now? I believe in us. And sometimes that's the same thing. Outside the hospital window, the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Helena Montrose, wife, mother, CEO, survivor, looked at her new family and knew she had found something more valuable than any business empire. She had found a home. The journey had not been easy. There had been pain, loss, betrayal, and fear. But there had also been discovery, growth, forgiveness, and above all, a love that had grown stronger for being tested. As the baby slept in her arms and Daniel held her hand, Helena knew that all the battles had been worth it. They had lost much, but gained even more. They had begun as strangers forced by circumstance, become enemies divided by misunderstanding, and finally found their way to become true companions, united by love. The legacy Helena would leave her children would not only be financial, but emotional. The understanding that true value in life comes not from what we accumulate, but from how we love, how we overcome adversity, and how we choose to forgive and begin anew. And in that hospital room with her newly formed family around her, Helena knew they had written a love story that would stand the test of time. Not because it had been easy, but precisely because it hadn't. Some love stories begin with a first glance. Theirs began with a rescue, was tested by illness, strengthened by adversity, and finally blossomed into the profound understanding that true love isn't just about finding the right person, but choosing to be that person for them every day, no matter the circumstances.